Hey everyone, welcome to the Redefining HR Fireside Chat Series. Today, I am really thrilled to be joined by Josh Bersin. Josh probably needs no introduction if you're watching this podcast, but I'll give him one anyway. He is a leading industry analyst and the dean of the Bersin Academy. But more importantly, I think for all of us, he's somebody who has been driving the conversation around what HR can be for years. And coming out of 2020, when I was writing Redefining HR, there were a couple voices that I knew I wanted to tap into in the beginning of the book, just to kind of set the foundation for this big kind of recalibration that we were all experiencing in 2020. And Josh was definitely one of those voices. So, was thrilled to have him include his thoughts in the beginning of the book and thrilled to spotlight some of his work and research throughout the book. So this is an interactive AMA. So I'm going to be opening up with some questions for Josh, and then I'm going to open it up to all of you who are viewing to add your own questions. So as I've learned in past fireside chats, it'll be hard for me to kind of toggle between the conversation and the chat room. So if you wouldn't mind, hold your questions until I open up Q&A, and then I can check out both. And if you're just joining us, go ahead and jump into the chat room and say hello, introduce yourself, say where you are from. So all of you that are viewing and spending the next hour with us can get to know each other. So with that, Josh, thanks so much for making time for this. I want to just start off with obviously going through what we went through in 2020 and what we're, still experiencing right now has been a pretty seismic shift for the field of HR. And I want to get into a lot of nuanced aspects of that. But before we drill down, let's just kind of start at the top. Like when you look at the events of 2020, how do you see at a macro level how they have, fundamentally impacted the field of HR?
Well, first of all, Lars, thank you for inviting me. I think your book is great, and I've followed you for a long time. For me, what happened was, I've told this story before. I think a lot of what we're now going through in 2021 started in 2008. It started during the financial meltdown when we realized we had to redesign jobs, redesign organizations, deal with digital disruption, deal with automation, deal with AI, deal with data. And we've been talking about it for a decade, mostly in a somewhat academic way. And then the pandemic just accelerated it. And made it urgent to deal with all these things at once. And added to that, this issue of well-being and resilience and patience and flexibility and what I call human-centered leadership that's always been there, but always been sort of a sideline topic that HR people worried about. So the pandemic is really, to me, a business transformation event that has forced companies to transform what they sell, how they sell it, who they sell it to, and of course, all the people practices. And working at home and working remotely and working in gig, wasn't predictable. I mean, I certainly wasn't predicting it. I was on a plane every week. I mean, virtually every week I was going nuts. And here we are having almost better relationships, more connections online than we ever did before. So I think this is pretty positive. Obviously, a lot of people got sick and there have been some terrible things too, but I think this is a big, kind of quantum leap forward in the business community on how we're going to go to market and how we're going to, kind of manage people and run our organizations.
Yeah. I mean, when you take that view and kind of layer it on the field of HR, you mentioned kind of some of the seeds were planted back in 2008, or some of the shifts that we're experiencing now. How do you see being the biggest kind of contrasts between the type of HR capabilities that we need to build today moving forward than, the capabilities that we relied upon, yesterday, actually probably going back to February of 2020 and earlier than that?
Well, the many of the things that we were working on, prior to this have just gone, kind of accelerated, like using data and using technology and thinking about design thinking and employee experience. But I think the big thing that changed in the pandemic is you can do experimentation, iterative development, and get something out quickly, and it's okay. It's not a bunch of, oh, well, maybe we should wait. Let's go to the committee meeting and get approval. One of the companies I talked to is a pharmaceutical company. And in the early days of the pandemic, they said, well, in order for us to roll out a new program, we have to go to the such and such committee. And that committee only meets every 30 days, and the agenda is full for 2 more meetings. So we really can't meet with them for 3 more months. So we really can't even test the idea until we meet with them. So it means it's probably 6 months before we actually get the idea in place, and then probably a year later before we roll it out. That's just insane.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just ridiculous. All of that kind of stuff got thrown aside. And we found that, not every HR program is perfect. It never is, but it's good enough to get started. And if people do a reasonably good job of design, they can improve it iteratively. And that's just been a breakthrough. I hear this over and over and over again. People are doing things in days or weeks that would have taken months or years. And it's a big lesson for me too, that it's pretty easy to lean in and work as a team and design something new. If everybody's on the same page and everybody understands the urgency.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you raised that point, because I think if you look at, how HR teams were often oriented, it was around, you had to have so many layers of approval, buy-in, support. You had to fully test a concept. You had to have it fully baked before you could roll it out. And that would just take so much time. And in this new, I talked a little bit about kind of the VUCA reality that we're living in right now. That's probably going to be somewhat of a constant to different degrees from here on out. And so if we're not embracing agile, and I don't necessarily mean in a traditional context of, having stand-ups and huddles, but having more kind of lighter weight processes that we kind of build on and we design on and we pilot, test, iterate, launch, or scrap, we're going to have a hard time keeping pace with the changes that, the external factors are driving, but also the demands of our employees, especially now that we're in this environment where so many more companies are remote and or hybrid. If I'm somebody who is in a high demand role, I can work for 10 blue chip companies without having to consider relocating based on this. So it's going to be really important, I think, for companies to be much more nimble and more specifically kind of HR teams. When you think about building skills for this new reality, what are the skills that maybe we weren't, traditionally thought of as part of the core, expertise or skill set of HR teams that, in the past that will now need to be today? Meaning if somebody's watching and maybe they're at the mid stage of their career and they're an aspiring leader, what are some of the disciplines, skills, capabilities that they should be focusing on? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So they're better equipped to support their organizations into what's next.
Well, thank you. That's a good question. And, we were talking earlier, we have this capability project we've started that is basically to find 90 capabilities in HR. So it's complicated. There's a lot of things in HR that you need to know. But, there's this idea of the T-shaped career, which is you're deep in some things and you're horizontal in other things. And I think that's the world of HR. HR is now an innovative profession. Believe it or not, you get to design things, you get to create things, you get to invent things. And you really typically are not good at that until you understand the context of the problem. So if you're a sourcer, a recruiter, or compensation specialist, and that's all you know, you're very limited in your ability to come up with new ideas. So I think the mantra and the real crusade for HR is to widen your aperture of the things you understand and get to know the adjacencies. For example, recruiting and learning and talent mobility are all the same thing now. I mean, most big companies are looking at internal mobility and recruiting as a connected event.
Yeah.
It used to be that they were two completely different ends of the HR department and the people didn't talk to each other. So I call this full stack HR, which is the same thing that software engineers have to go through. If you look at software engineering, I've had a lot of engineers work for me. If you only know one piece of the system, that's great. But as soon as the next design project comes up, you're not that useful. So we need to be full stack in our capabilities. The third thing I'd say in terms of, kind of general capabilities in HR, we've been having these conversations with companies about the pandemic every week now for a year. The human stuff is the most important stuff. What will make people feel engaged, that they belong, included, empowered, trained, skilled, listened to? Those things, actually are the core of HR. They sound kind of funny, but they keep coming up over and over and over again as the biggest drivers of success. We do all these studies. We're just analyzing a big report, a data set right now on employee experience. We had 800 companies tell us about 80 or 90 different employee experience strategies. And, the one that is scoring the highest and coming out as the most important of all is people willing to help each other at work. That's not a technology or a tool or a process. That's a cultural thing. So, get back to that stuff and you'll realize it's really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, and I want to get into employee experience with you next, but kind of picking up on what you said, I think that for HR teams specifically right now, from a legacy standpoint, we were pretty accustomed to working with playbooks and set approaches on how you think about performance and recruiting and learning, and like those are all kind of blown up in this new reality. I don't mean blow up and like none of them are relevant at all. Of course, there's aspects of them, but we have to really rethink how we approach building all these things, and more importantly, to your point, from a full stack perspective, how they're all integrated. We can't operate in silos, and as operators, we can't be just a domain expert in one discipline, because it's going to limit the value we can bring to our business and our team if we don't actually understand how that connects to other aspects of the HR operation. Right. So, I know employee experience is something you've been covering a lot lately. How do you, just to level set, because I know different people may have different definitions of what they view employee experience encompassing. So for you, when you use employee experience, what do you mean? What does that apply to? Well,
it's unfortunately a buzzword, so it's starting to mean whatever you want it to mean. But I think the history of it is maybe 6-7 years ago, somebody came up with this idea of using design thinking in HR, and studying and watching what the behaviors and issues were for people at work, and then you doing iterative design and design thinking around that, instead of just designing a new program for this and a program for this and a program for this. And that took off, and we started looking at moments that matter and segmentation of workers into groups, so we could say, well, the IT people need these kinds of things and the salespeople needs these kinds of things. And then eventually it expanded, and more of the engagement and retention related topics got thrown into the idea. And now what's happening in most bigger companies is employee experience is bigger than HR. It's HR, it's IT, it's facilities, it's food, it's legal, it's everything, because those are the things that affect employees. The HR domain is important, but all these other things matter too. And the pandemic, brought everything together in terms of working at home and coming back to the office and being safe. So it's become a corporate initiative. And just like customer experience isn't owned by just marketing or just sales or just product, employee experience isn't owned by just HR. Now, if you're a smaller company, you may not have, this all defined yet, but I think bigger companies have thought about this for a long time. Like there's a lot of companies that have people and places and work, HR and workplace together. So that's what's going on. And then of course the tech industry has gotten really, really excited about this. So all the tech tools have turned into employee experience tools, and everybody's crowding into the market, kind of confusing it. But that's the big story. And one more point on that I sort of think is important to think about. I think employee experience is important because two reasons. One is 80 to 90% of jobs are service jobs. So when people don't feel productive or safe, they don't perform well and the company doesn't perform well. And the second is employees are by far the most important stakeholders you have in the company. You might think it's customers, but actually it's not. Customers don't tell you as much about what they need as employees. Employees will tell you when there's something. I don't know how to turn this thing off, this thing that I'm getting from Teams, but employees are an incredibly important source of information about how to run your company better. And so I think EX is, becoming a CEO level issue.
Yeah, and you raised an interesting point about so many people using it for different reasons now. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of AI, a year or two ago in the buzzword sense, meaning because it was such a hot and trending topic, HR tech vendors everywhere. It's like, oh yeah, our product is packed full of AI. We're going to transform with AI, and I think it created this hype bubble around the category that really confused the market. And so I like you actually defining employee experience and what it is. And interestingly enough, I think important for listeners and viewers to take note of, broader than just HR, because of what it entails and what it encompasses. Before we went on air, we were nerding out a little bit on this opportunity for being somewhat of a reset for the HR function, and how much of what we've gone through the last year has propelled us forward in a range of different ways. And I'm curious to get your perspective, because I think this would be fascinating to kind of get your take. If you were designing an HR or a people function from the ground up today, right? So new company, no legacy dogma, no existing practices, right? They're like, Josh, build it from the ground up. What would it look like? What components would it have? What teams would it have? I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Okay, that's actually a very difficult question. Well, there's 90 capabilities, so you can't do everything. I mean, to some degree, it depends on the cycle of the company. If the company is growing like crazy, you're going to be mostly focused on recruiting.
Yep.
And you're going to be focused on sourcing and assessing and determining what the culture is and how are you going to decide who are the right people and who aren't. And so that'll give you a big core of knowledge about the management team and the behaviors that make the company successful and so forth. And you get to have all those conversations. And then as the company grows, you're going to get into leadership, and you're getting into the leadership pipeline, and you're going to get into development and onboarding. So then you're going to have to build out expertise in that. So, it tends to go through that cycle where smaller companies start with what's really needed now, and then they start to get into the more sophisticated, arcane topics. And then eventually you're going to worry about diversity, and then you're going to worry about belonging, and you're going to start doing engagement surveys, and somebody's going to quit, and you think, why did they quit? Oh my God, we have a problem with this over here. So that's kind of the way I would see it as a growing company. For a big, large organization, I think the HR department looks and feels a little bit like a professional services team, where there are specialists and consultants and service delivery people who have dedicated roles, dedicated jobs, and they may be global jobs. I mean, in a lot of big companies, the global head of diversity or the global head of learning, is in a country, and they just sort of keep track of and try to orchestrate things in different organizations. And then the HR team really works together and spends a lot of time getting to know what other people are doing so that the function works in an integrated way. And I think great HR teams have a lot of mobility. They move people around. You're not in the same job forever. They are very aware of the business issues and the product and sort of marketplace issues that the company is facing. And they have a healthy team focused on technology, because there's nothing in HR that isn't dependent on technology now or isn't somehow impacted by technology. So there has to be an architecture and technology group. And then they have somebody or a team that worries about data. One of the most frustrating things in HR is, two people come to the meeting with different data about, different opinions as to what's going on because they don't have the same data. So all of those have to be done, but there's no perfect organization model. But I do know that what tends to happen is if you don't keep asking that question, you end up with a whole bunch of business partners, a whole bunch of generalists, a whole bunch of recruiters. And the next thing you know, your employee to HR ratio has gone from 150 to 100 to 75 to 50. And then all of a sudden, why do we have so many HR people?
Yeah. Is there and I know, the question has lots of variables that would impact the answer, but, what do you typically see as what do you think is often a healthy ratio of HR support to employee population?
From all the data I've been through in the company that I've talked to, it ranges probably from, 75 or 80 to 1 to 150 to 1. I think it's hard to get out of that range without really getting into trouble.
Yeah.
If you have more HR people than 70 to 1, then you're probably dealing with a lot of bureaucracy and lack of self-service and ill-defined processes. Some big companies, though, have basically distributed business. Like I remember I met with a Japanese company that said, we have 100 VPs of HR. And I said, you got to be crazy, because no, we have 100 business units. They're independent P&Ls. They all have presidents, and we're not going to tell them what to do. Okay, great. So they have a lot of HR people. But generally, that's sort of the ballpark numbers that I find are meaningful.
And I'd love to shift. You mentioned a couple of times this global capabilities project that I know you've recently launched.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. Like, what was the? I mean, I probably have a sense of what the genesis of it was.
Yeah.
Why you're working on it, but like, what is it? How can people who are viewing get involved? And there's a component for other people to be able to contribute. So I'd love to just learn more.
Well, thank you, Lars. This is a big deal, and I want to spend just 2 minutes on it. Well, I've been doing consulting and research in HR for a long time, and so I've met just hundreds of incredibly and talented people. And one of the things I learned over the years, if I think back about it, is the really, really successful people in HR know a lot. They have done a lot of different things. They have run maybe learning. They've worked as recruiters. They've moved out of HR and come back. They've had management jobs. They've had specialist jobs. And when we started building our academy, we realized there's just way too much stuff to teach people about. And we were building these programs that were topical based. And all of the CHROs said to me, well, I like your academy, but what's your competency model? And I was like, oh my God, do you really want another competency model? SHRM has one, CIPD one, Dave Ulrich, everybody's come up with one of these. And they're all sort of the same, actually. And I thought, well, that's really the old way of thinking about it. Competency models were designed to attach to jobs. So you had a fixed job like recruiter, and then you had competencies for that job. The problem is jobs are changing very fast, the nature of jobs and then the size of jobs. So what I wanted to do is say, let's look at the capabilities independent of the jobs, because I know that people will need different capabilities in different jobs, and they will take those capabilities with them from job to job. So we can't just, lock them together. So we basically built, through lots and lots of discussions with lots of companies, a list of 91 business capabilities. And by business capabilities, I mean things like employment brand is a business capability. That is a complicated topic. So there's 90 of these things. And we realized we were showing it to people, and they were just flabbergasted. They're like, wow, I didn't realize there were so many things that I need to be aware of. Now, I can't be an expert on all these things, but at least I need to know something about them. And we went out and said, well, how are we going to use this? So we built an assessment. So we're calling this a project because we know these 90 things will change year over year. And we now have an assessment, and about 5,000 people have gone through the assessment. And you can assess yourself against these 90 things on a 5-level scale. It's very simple. Number 1 is, I don't even know what this is. Number 2 is, I've done this maybe once or twice. Number 3 is, I've done this a fair amount. Number 4 is, I've done this many times in many companies, in many industries. And number 5 is, I could write the book on this. So it's an experiential-based assessment. And what we're finding is it's fascinating when you look at this data. First of all, we're seeing within companies wide disparities of expertise in the same role. Like you look at business partners in one company, they're widely different. Yeah. When you look at this, it teaches you a lot about what we need to do to make the profession more vibrant and make every individual more successful. So that's kind of where we are with it. And you can get it through our academy. We're going to open it up to non-academy members pretty soon. But right now, if you join our academy, you can go through the whole thing and get benchmarked. And then if you're a company, we can do the assessment for your company pretty easily, and we don't charge a lot. So you can go through and just assess your HR people, and then they can look at it and you can say, oh, well, like one of the companies we did an assessment for is a multi-industry company that has restaurants and hotels and all sorts of different. And then we looked at the data, and it's like ridiculous. The restaurant businesses are so far behind in their capabilities compared to the hotels. It was almost like unbelievable. And the CHRO looked at this and she said, we got to move some people around. I mean, we got to move people in and out of these different businesses if we want this, HR function to really operate well. So there's all sorts of interesting benefits of doing it this way. The reason that I like it as an analyst is I get to look at this data and I can see the holes. I can see the trends. I can see what people are trying to learn more about, what they don't want, and what, sort of what's trending down, what's trending up. So it's a really, really fascinating project.
Yeah, and did any capabilities stand out to you one way or another in terms of?
Well, let me give you a couple things here. So we're analyzing the data now. So first of all, the lowest rated capability by far is DEI. People feel very uncomfortable about their expertise and experience in DEI. And that's a very important finding, because DEI is not a job for specialists. It's a job for everybody. Yeah. Everybody in the business and everybody in HR has to be comfortable with the DEI topic and what their role is and what they're going to do to contribute. So when you see that 96% or something of HR people feel uncomfortable or undertrained or unaware of DEI issues, that's a very easy thing to deal with. So that was one thing. The second thing, when we asked people, we asked them to pick 3 things they really want to get better at, and the 96 some other things. Number 1 by far is change, which is obviously a big deal, and that's a complicated topic. The third thing that's interesting to me is we ask people, how would you like to develop your capabilities? Would you like to take a course? Would you like to get a mentor? Would you like to go to an assignment? And by far, the number 1 requested method of developing capabilities is not going to a course. It's an assignment. People want to get a project. They want to work on a project in this area. So this whole idea of agile and, giving people more developmental projects has to be part of the design of HR, because that's the way people learn and that's the way people want to learn. So cross-functional teaming and working in agile design projects together and bringing somebody from recruiting to work in learning and taking somebody in learning and sending them over recruiting. Those are the kinds of things that I think we really need to push more of in the HR profession. And I think it'll just, make the whole profession even more powerful.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So definitely check that out if you're watching this and take the survey. I think that data set will be super compelling to understand where we are, but also where our gaps are. So that's fascinating. I do want to open it up to Q&A now. So if you are joining us live and you have questions for Josh, go ahead and add them into the chat window. I will now be DJing between the camera and the chat window as I work to get as many of the questions that you have to Josh. And actually, the first question comes from Ciara Lakhani. She is the Chief People Officer at Dashlane. And she was curious, she mentioned a lot of your earlier work centered around proven practices and best practices, leading practices from Fortune 50 and larger kind of enterprise companies. Do you see some of those emerging, high value practices coming out of different sectors now? Maybe the startups, maybe more venture backed, kind of outside of that core Fortune 50 group.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, small companies are much more creative and innovative because they have less resource. So, I'm always impressed with what small companies do and new ideas they come up with for onboarding or recruiting or, new models of pay or management training or supervisor training. Absolutely. I mean, big companies have very creative things too, but they are creative in an enterprise way. I'll never forget, I went up to Toronto one cold winter and actually got sick. I remember how bad it was, but I went to see Scotiabank, which was at the time was acquiring a company in Portugal. And the head of learning was pulling his hair out, because they had all these learning systems and they didn't know what to do. And he said, well, we tried to get everybody in learning across Scotiabank, which is all over the world, to agree on, our new learning technology roadmap. And they just didn't want to do it. They just refused. And he said, so I gave up. And I said, great, we're not going to do that anymore. You do whatever you want, but we're going to have a global best practices council. Yeah. And you can join the council if you want, but you don't have to. Well, everybody joined, and all of a sudden they started sharing ideas and they started helping each other. And they ended up building a really well-aligned global learning function without telling everybody that they're going to be part of one big corporate university and then have to do it the same way. Now that to me is a creative solution. It doesn't sound very innovative to a small company, but for a big company, that's a very daunting problem.
Yeah.
So big companies do really interesting creative things at an enterprise level that are unique and innovative for them that might seem silly to a small company. But I talk to companies of all size, and I'm always listening to what HR people are doing, because some of the greatest ideas come from, you know, little one-man HR shops that just kind of winged it and came up with something cool.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes in those environments, you know, necessity and scrappiness drives innovation, right?
Yep.
You have to find a way to get it done, and you can't get it done with dollars or headcount. So,
well, in fact, you know, some of the smartest, I don't mean smartest, you know, sort of mentally, but just sort of more interesting and innovative HR people work for small companies. We have a couple of videos in our academy. You know, one of the women that was an early HR person at Netflix, you know, people that worked at Khan's Academy, you know, some of these very fast growing early stage companies actually had great HR people. Nobody knows who they are. Because they went off and worked for other companies later, but it's a kind of a place to find great people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so interesting, especially in those smaller organizations, when you have that person behind the scenes that's just architecting some amazing programs, and you know, unheralded people sometimes in those roles, they don't get the spotlight.
So they tend to be more multidisciplinary,
Yeah.
because they have to be,
Right.
which is another proof point to me that we all have to be more multidisciplinary.
Yeah, which goes back to your T shape.
Right.
For sure.
Yep.
Next question I want to get into comes from Hannah. She's curious, is there a correlation between investment in training of employees and profitability?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is, you know, boy, this has been my life. Okay. Here's the way to think about it, Hannah. Roughly, depending on the industry you're in, 50 to 75% of the expense in your company is payroll. So you're spending a lot of money on people, whether it be hourly or salaried people or executives or engineers, whatever they are. And so if you want to get an ROI on money being spent, if you could make those people, first of all, there's the retention, the cost of retention. There's been a lot of studies that say it costs 2 to 3 to 4 times the salary of a person to replace them, because there's all the issues of productivity and training and then searching and sourcing and all that. There's the productivity of getting their job done. And then there's the opportunity for them to improve customer service, improve innovation, and so forth. How are you going to do that? Well, training's the easiest way. Training is not that expensive. The average company spends 1 to 2% of payroll on training. It's a tiny number compared to the cost of salary. So when somebody says, "Oh, we can't afford to do any training, we don't have any money," well, you're paying people. You have plenty of money to pay them. You can't train them so they can do their jobs better. It makes no sense. So if you look at now there are times in companies' business cycle where the company doesn't need a lot of training. If you have a really hot product and everybody's buying it, well, you know, you just hire people and you just sell it. But usually at some point you reach a transformation, you know, stage where you're kind of going to a new area. You got a new industry, you got a new product, you got a new market, a new competitor, and you do have to train people. So I think if you're not spending 2 or 3% of your payroll or more, the really great companies spend up to 4% on training. You're probably, you know, underinvesting in your people. And also, training is an engagement tool. Training is an incredibly good way to get people to stay, to get people to want to come work for you, to create a sense of belonging in the company. So, you know, I could sit down with you, whoever, you know, whatever industry you're in, and probably convince you that this is not a hard thing to cost justify.
Yeah, I mean, that's some good statistics that hopefully some of you took note of that you can bring back to your CFOs or CEOs if you're getting any pushback on trying to expand.
And it doesn't have to be. And the other thing about training is you don't have to go out and hire a consultant and, you know, spend $100,000 on a course. You can get people together for 2 hours and just talk about something and have somebody teach somebody else how to do it because they've learned it. That counts too.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually, there's an interesting, with that analogy, there's an interesting kind of culture and team building aspect of that. When you can look across your organization and find subject matter experts in different disciplines and, create platforms and forums for them to share their expertise. I remember I think it was Hootsuite probably 4 or 5 years ago. They had a program where an employee, it was a set day. I think it was like a set hour or maybe 2 hours every Friday, and the cadence I might be butchering, but you get the gist. And basically, anybody could come and they could teach about anything at
Yeah.
all. It could be work related, could be personal, could be astrophysics, like whatever they were into. They had 15 minutes to do almost like a mini internal TED talk, sharing how they learned or how they think about X thing. And it was hugely embraced by the organization. People loved it because you got to see a side of employees and colleagues that you might not see otherwise. And some of it was tangible, like I can apply this to my work now. Some of this was, it'll just make me more. It's more on the enrichment side than necessarily helping me do my current job. So there's a lot of elements to those internal programs that I think are really healthy for organizations when done right as well. So, and again, as Josh mentions, doesn't require bringing in an external consultant.
Well, I'll
Or
tell you,
using
I was just on the phone yesterday with a really interesting company. There's a company called Hilti, Hilti, and they sell, kind of equipment to, construction trade and so forth. They blew up their whole training department and said, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We'll create some formal training, but you guys do the training. We're going to teach you how to create videos. We want you to make 5 or 10-minute videos of things you know how to do. We'll put them on this platform. If people like your videos, great. If they don't like your videos, too bad. You can learn how to do them better. And sure enough, it has taken off. They went from a culture of almost no training now. I think they told me they had something like 1 million hours of consumption per month. There's about 20,000 people in this company.
Wow.
So it's all authored. Now, the training department is helping people author good stuff, and they're giving them a lot of feedback and teaching them how to use the tools. But I think almost every company could do much, much more of that. And it's not that expensive.
Yeah, that's those numbers are huge. That's massive. And I think
Yeah.
also, there's as somebody who's thinks about employer branding a lot. If you're building the skills, whether it's video or writing or whatever they might need to develop and create their content, that also may help them actually become a better brand ambassador
Oh,
next
yeah.
time as well. So
Some of those are going to be great branding.
yeah, exactly. Right. Like these are the kind of people you get to work with here.
Yeah.
I mean, that's I certainly would be tapping into that. I want to go back to the audience Q&A. So next question comes from Balbina in Vancouver, and it's a kind of a follow up from your mention about optimal HR to employee ratios, and she's curious to get your thoughts on the number of internal career coaches per X amount of employees. So what's a successful model that you've seen work well, and if any, why in terms of ratios of internal coaches to employees?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think I would ask, what is the goal of your coaching program? I just wrote a big article about BetterUp the other day on coaching. Is it for new leaders? Is it for high potentials? Is it for anybody? Is it for people in trouble? I think you have to put a little box around what you mean by coaching, because there's no way you're ever going to hire enough coaches to coach everybody on everything.
Yeah.
And so I would start with the problem of what are, in the top 20 things that are bugging people around here, what are the top 2 or 3 that we think the employee base and the leadership would like us to focus on? And let's have enough coaches on demand to handle that. There are coaching networks. There's, companies like Bravely, and then, BetterUp, which has a whole AI-based coaching, solution that you can leverage expert coaches without having to hire them. So I wouldn't go out and hire too many coaches. I don't think that's necessarily a good way to spend your money. There's because the chances are whatever the problem is, there will be a specialist coach somewhere in the market that's probably better than somebody than you would hire in your company. And also managers are the ones that are supposed to be coaching people, not HR. I had a funny conversation with a pharma company. I won't mention the name of them. And they got acquired by a Swiss company. And they out here, the pharma company out here is a regular, normal Silicon Valley kind of company. And they said, oh, well, our buyer, the company that we acquired us, doesn't believe in managers talking to employees. All employee interactions go through HR. I was like, what? This is nuts. Well, that's the way they do it in Switzerland, according to this particular company. So if you want to have a coaching conversation about your job, you go to HR first. Well, I don't think that's really the right way to do it. I think you should go to your manager first, and then HR should be there to help the managers learn how to be good coaches. So I wouldn't just hire a whole bunch of coaching people into HR without thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a good advice, and that's a really bizarre practice. I can't imagine that is a broad.
It was very odd to me, but I think it's because it was a very old family-owned company, and that was just the way they ran it.
Next question comes from Tim, and this question is: with many companies now considering hybrid models as we begin thinking about returning to work post-COVID, what are some engagement strategies that you think people leaders will adopt to keep a similar sense of engagement and belonging for all employees? So, as we move through the pandemic and now it's safe to be back in offices and we have hybrid models, some people are in an office, some people are not. What are some recommendations you have for maintaining engagement across people who are coming into an office and people who are not?
Well, I've worked at home now for 25 years, so I'm kind of familiar with it. And I've had employees working from home. People are people. And so it really does come down to connecting with people on a personal level and a professional level. When they're in the office, you can have a cup of coffee and chat. When they're not in the office, you have to call them on the phone, say hello, open a Zoom meeting and say, hey, how's everything going? Check in, send them a text message. There's just other mechanisms for doing it. But I think the real key to creating an engaging experience for people that are remote is to think about them as teammates and human beings and check in periodically and also be aware of the fact that, when you're working at home, you have all sorts of weird distractions and, unproductive times when, somebody comes to the front door to deliver a package, the kids come running in the room, the computer breaks, the internet goes down, whatever. Those are just a reality. You can't just expect people to always be there, always have their cameras on, always be ready for the meeting. Just because the meeting was scheduled, they might have something else happening. But if you accommodate those issues, you actually will find people are probably more productive and more engaged at home because they can, create their own experience that's best for them. I think we're going to be coming back to the office. I mean, I'm not saying we're going to be home forever, because there are a lot of people that don't want to be home. They don't have enough space. They're tired of it. They like the social interactions. And I think what we're also learning now is, when you're all in the office and there's somebody on the other end of the line who you just ignore because you can't see them, I hope we'll get more sensitive to that too. And, let the people on the line, on the video, on the phone call, chime in the process. And that's a kind of a behavior that I think companies are learning that will probably stick with us over time. So there's no magic bullets, but this is what I'm finding. And people, by the way, the research shows that engagement levels are high. People are more positive on their work experience now than they have been for many years. So most companies are managing this reasonably well, even though it feels a little bit odd sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm excited about is we use the term remote work and we apply it to what our current circumstances are, but these are about as suboptimal as remote work circumstances can be. I mean, for many of us, depending on where we live, our kids are home with us. We're homeschool teachers. We were thrust into this situation. So we weren't able to design for it. Like maybe we wouldn't live in the homes that we live in. If we knew that we'd be working from home, we'd have a dedicated home office. So I'm excited, as we move through this, and people who choose to work remotely or even hybrid can design around and optimize structure.
Well, that's what's going on right now. I mean, this is the interesting thing here. This gets back to what I said about HR being an innovative function. You get to design this now. Yeah. I mean, I guarantee your CEO wants you to come up with something. Are you going to have satellite offices? Are you going to have people come in on Fridays or not come in on Fridays? I mean, you get to figure this out. When I was at Deloitte, I mean, I really learned a lot at Deloitte. There are no offices. Everybody is mobile. but everywhere you go in every city, there is a Deloitte office and your badge works. So they set this all up so that I could work anywhere, anytime, productively, and connect with people. And the culture was built around that. I think most companies are becoming more like professional services companies in almost every respect. So that's a really kind of a cool thing you get to work on this year, is coming up with some of these policies for, satellite offices. By the way, the other thing, I don't know about where you guys are. I spent a lot of time in the car, commuting, waiting in line, trying to get to the airport. All that time's been freed up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good things about the way things have worked out.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting, and continues to evolve. And I think you raised the most important point, which is, HR has an opportunity to write what our future will be in this. So it's hugely exciting. I want to jump over to a question from Bez, and Bez asks, how has DE&I changed in the last year, and what will make it effective going forward?
Well, if you read the report, we have a report called Elevating Equity that's on our website. It's free, and it's a really in-depth, study. We spent 6-7 months on it, and what we found, and we talked to a lot of DEI people, really amazing people. There's also a whole program on our academy about this. It's probably going to be one of our most successful programs ever. And what we found is that being the head of DEI is a really hard job, because you can't solve it in HR. It's not an HR problem. It's a problem of the whole company and every management practice and every business practice. Is your product priced and sold and distributed in a diverse and inclusive way? Do you treat customers and the supply chain in a diverse and inclusive way? If you do all of those things, then the people practices will be diverse and inclusive. If you look at Chevron is a diverse company because they do business all over the world in different cultures. Target is a diverse company because they sell products and services to diverse communities, and that's their business strategy. If you just come waltzing into HR and say, "Oh, I'm going to, improve the numbers," you're probably not going to have that much impact. What we found is that in many companies, a lot of these DEI training programs or sourcing and recruiting programs don't really change the experience at work that much. What changes it is working with senior leaders and creating a corporate-wide strategy. The head of DEI at Target, for example, Kira Fernandez, said to me, "It is not an HR function. It is a business function. Yeah. It is a part of our company, and HR is a major part of it." And unfortunately, because of the history of this whole domain, it gets thrown into HR, and the head CEO says, "Oh, let's just hire a head of DEI and let them worry about it." That's not the answer. You got to push back on that and say, "No, it's not my problem. It's your problem. It's everybody's problem. We all have to deal with this issue." And training is a piece of it, but training is a relatively small piece of it. We actually found that training is not that highly correlated with results. The biggest thing that really drives results is listening and understanding and paying attention to people's issues, and then reacting on the problems as they come up. And then all these things like ESGs and blind recruiting and so forth, and diverse candidate pools and so forth become useful. So it's a big topic, and I encourage you to read that report or come to our academy and take the program. And I just looked, yesterday, there's 4,000 people in that program talking about it in our academy, and it's a lot of conversations, a lot of things to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's as we look through 2020, we talk about some of the impacts of the events of 2020 on the field today. I mean, we're talking about remote and hybrid, but fundamentally rethinking how we approach DEI absolutely has to be one of our core kind of takeaways and mandates, I think, coming out of 2020 if you work in HR and people operations. And it's not something that Josh mentions that we all own, but we have to be able to influence and understand, and start with that understanding piece at an individual level. I think that's so important.
One more example on that. I think another case study to make you aware of the issue is what the Biden administration is doing. And, I don't always admire what the federal government does, but, he's basically said every dollar spent in the federal government under Biden's administration will be spent in an equitable way. So it isn't a program, it is everything.
Yeah.
Everything is going to be done this way. And that's kind of what has to happen in a company. It has to just be part of the culture of everything you do, your products, your services, your people, your hiring, everything.
I want to get to one more question as we're winding down on time here. This one is from Sarika. I hope I got the pronunciation on that right, and my apologies if I did not. She mentioned that there's a lot of kind of pressure and expectations on managers and leaders around coaching and engagement, particularly in this time with so many employees being remote due to COVID. Do you have any recommendations on good coaching trainings or workshops to enable our managers to enable our managers' success and skills in coaching? Like, how can we help basically make our managers better coaches in this kind of new remote environment?
Wow, there's so much stuff on that. I'm not sure I know the best programs for managers. There's just dozens and dozens out there. We have a program in our academy called Coaching at Scale, which is for you as an HR person to talk about it. So I could go in there and look around and see what vendors people are using. I wish I had a simple answer, but I think using the word, defining what a coach is and making it clear that we expect managers to be coaches, not just directing. Your job as a manager isn't to just direct and assess people and drive performance, but it is also to coach, to listen, to be an ally, to develop people. I mean, one of the CHROs I met many years ago who I really admired said to me, when we do management training, I tell the managers that they don't own the employees. The employees are working for me. Your job as a manager is to take care of them so that I can move them to the next job. So what she was basically saying is, if you're not developing people and helping them figure out what they can do next, you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
So some of this is just communicating what your job is as a manager and getting the CEO and the top leadership to buy into that.
And Josh, last question for you that I want to wrap up with. You, I think for years through your reports, your keynotes, content, etc., you've been kind of helping practitioners get a read on how the field of HR is evolving, how our thinking is shifting, new tools that are coming into the marketplace, massive shifts in different functions within HR. Where do you get your inspiration? Like, I think a lot of people look to your content. Like, what about you? Like, how do you look across, whether inside the industry, outside the industry? Like, what inspires you?
Well, what I do, I'm a little bit of an odd person. I'm an engineer, so I have a little bit of a mathematical mind. I see HR as a very, very, very cross-domain profession. I read The Economist and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, and I read business magazines, and I listen to different podcasts, and I keep up on tech. And every day I think to myself, aha, there's something that would make an organization better. And so HR isn't really about doing HR. Yeah. It's about finding all of the little things that business people may not even think about to make the organization better for them and for people. And it involves a lot of stuff. So my inspiration of being in this profession and why I love it so much, I don't come from HR. I was never trained in HR. I've actually never done HR. But I've come to it from the outside, in a sense, seeing the incredible power that HR has when all these different connections are made. And so I'm really, in some sense, a big, giant pattern matcher. And then we use this research methodology to figure out things that aren't obvious. Like we do all these studies and we look at all these HR practices and we find out, the thing that everybody's doing actually isn't the one that's the most important. It's something people aren't doing. And we find that out through data. So, and the other thing that I have learned to respect is that there is no perfect answer. Human beings are complicated. No two people are the same. No two organizations are the same. And so a lot of what HR people do is sort of figure out through consulting or creativity what is going to work best in our company at this particular point in time for this problem. And, that's a really exciting career. So, I feel very fortunate that I've landed here and just, I've been able to help people do it. So that's kind of my background. And I think the fact that I came to this as an engineer has helped me because I'm always I'm always trying to solve the problem. Everything's a little puzzle for me.
That is a good quality to have, I think, when you're looking at this space, particularly at this moment in time. So, Josh, thanks so much for coming on the Fireside Chat series, letting us all tap into your brain and your expertise. And thanks so much for making time. And for all of you that joined us on the live discussion, thank you for making some space in your day for this conversation. And want to wish all of you the best. Thank you to Josh, and take good care of each other. Take good care of yourselves. And that will wrap up this episode.
Great.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Lars. Thanks a lot.